The night my friends decided to make me the punchline of their humor, I was already at my lowest, sitting alone in my small apartment in Columbus, Ohio, staring at a future that felt painfully empty. They told me it was just a harmless setup, something to get me out of my shell after months of drifting through workdays and sleepless nights. I agreed because I had stopped believing anything meaningful could still happen to me, and when you believe that, even embarrassment feels easier than hope. I walked into that coffee shop expecting laughter at my expense, but instead, I walked into a moment that quietly rearranged my entire life without warning. Before the story goes any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that life can surprise you when you least expect it, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that may be struggling right now. At that point in my life, I was 32, working a steady but uninspiring job in logistics, recently laid off once before and constantly afraid it could happen again. My friends, all paired off and moving forward, saw me as the guy who never quite landed on his feet. I laughed along with their jokes, but inside I carried the weight of quiet disappointment, the kind that settles into your bones when plans fail again and again. They said the date would be funny, that it would shake things up, and I didn't ask questions because asking would have meant caring. I showed up expecting awkwardness, maybe even cruelty, and braced myself for it like someone used to disappointment. The coffee shop was warm and softly lit, the kind of place that smelled like roasted beans and rain-soaked jackets. I noticed her almost immediately, not because she looked like some impossible dream, but because she seemed real in a way I hadn't felt around anyone in a long time. Her name was Grace, and she sat there calmly, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, eyes thoughtful, as if she was observing the world instead of hiding from it. The joke, I would later realize, was never about her. It was about me assuming I wasn't worth something sincere. Grace didn't overwhelm me with charm or forced energy. She had a quiet steadiness that made the noise in my head slow down. Being around her felt like standing still after years of running. I learned she worked as a pediatric physical therapist in Cincinnati and volunteered on weekends at a community center in a rougher part of town. She had lost her father years earlier and had learned to build strength out of grief rather than bitterness. Without any dramatic moments or exaggerated scenes, something shifted inside me as I realized I was being seen without judgment. As the evening unfolded, I felt something unfamiliar and unsettling, a mix of fear and hope. Fear because I could feel myself wanting something again, and hope because that wanting didn't feel foolish. The challenge wasn't impressing her or proving my worth, but believing that I was allowed to sit at the table of a meaningful life. I had spent so long shrinking myself that growth felt dangerous. When we eventually parted ways, I walked back to my car in silence, realizing that the joke had cracked open something I had locked away. The days that followed were restless. I replayed the evening in my mind, questioning whether I had imagined the connection. My friends eventually admitted they had expected the night to be awkward and forgettable, never anticipating that Grace would be someone who carried such depth. They stopped laughing when they saw the change in me. I started showing up to work differently, standing straighter, volunteering for responsibilities I had once avoided, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because meeting her reminded me that I still had something to give. Over time, Grace became a steady presence in my life, not as a dramatic rescue, but as a mirror reflecting who I could be if I stopped hiding. We spent afternoons walking along the Scioto Mile, evenings helping kids at the community center, and quiet Sundays planning nothing at all. I faced my own unresolved fears, including the belief that failure defined me. She never pushed or fixed me, but her belief was consistent enough that I began to borrow it until I could create my own. The biggest challenge came when my company announced another round of layoffs. Old panic rose in my chest, threatening to undo all the progress I had made. This time, instead of collapsing inward, I prepared, updated my skills, and reached out to contacts I had once been too insecure to call. I realized that even if I lost my job, I hadn't lost my direction. The layoff never came, but the lesson stayed. I was no longer living in reaction to fear. What surprised me most was how quietly life changed. There was no single cinematic moment where everything clicked. It was a series of small choices made possible because someone saw me as more than a joke. Grace didn't save me. She reminded me I was capable of saving myself, and that realization carried more power than any grand gesture ever could. If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever felt written off, underestimated, or quietly hopeless, remember that one unexpected moment can shift everything. And before we reach the end, I want to ask you something special. Please comment below with the word hope if you believe life can still surprise you even after disappointment. As I stand here now, years later, still in the United States I once felt trapped in, but living a completely different emotional life, I understand that the joke date wasn't a joke at all. It was a turning point disguised as humiliation, a reminder that the people who underestimate us don't get to decide our worth. Grace and I built a life grounded in service, patience, and quiet joy, and every ordinary day feels like proof that second chances don't always announce themselves loudly. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness and unexpected connections can change everything, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your engagement helps keep these stories alive, reaching people who might be standing where I once stood, waiting for a reason to believe again.